folks, today you are going to learn 6 things that you absolutely do not want to say to the police immediately after you have been forced to shoot a violent attacker in self-defense. And you're gonna want to take notes on today's video because it may save you tons of money or keep your butt out of prison. And folks, my apologies now if there's any wind noise in this video. It is a very windy day out here today, and I'm trying my best to only say the lines when there's no big gusts of wind happening. But first, for new viewers, I have been in law enforcement for over 20 years, and I have been involved in critical incidents. So folks, I have been there, I have done that, but I just want to give this important information off to you folks that own firearms for self-defense. So tip number 1 is never call your bad guy that you just shot, never call him a derogatory name right after you shot him. Now, before you click off the video and laugh and say that you would never do that, hey, I want you to think about this. It is very common for self-defenders to be very angry at the criminals that they just had to shoot because, number 1, that self-defender did not want to be in that self-defense shooting. Number 2, that criminal's actions is what forced that self-defender to have to shoot that violent criminal. So again, it is very common for self-defenders to be extremely angry at that violent criminal immediately after they shot them. Now, I want you just to imagine this. You have been forced to shoot a violent attacker in self-defense, and the responding police are starting to arrive, and they ask you what happened. And at that moment in time, because you had just shot him, you have this big surge of adrenaline that's going through you. You're in a very, not in a good way, but in a very excited state. Plus, you're also very angry because he just forced you to have to shoot him. You very well may be tempted to say something like, that son of a blankety blank pulled a knife on me, or something to that effect. Now, if your self-defense shooting was justified, it doesn't automatically make your shooting unjustified just because you called that attacker a bad name. However, you just got to keep in mind that anything that you say or do can be used against you in court at a later time, and a gun-hating prosecutor or a civil attorney may try to use that against you later in court to try to paint you as an angry person that was just wanting to kill somebody. And tip number 2, you never want to say that you shot to kill. Now, at some point, you might end up needing to give a more detailed statement about what occurred in that shooting. You know, what led up to it, what was the bad guy's actions that forced you to have to defend yourself. And if that time comes, you never want to say that you shot to kill. You want to say that you shot to stop that bad guy's actions that put your life in jeopardy. In fact, if I were you, I wouldn't even joke around now on social media saying that dead men can't testify in court. The simple fact is, folks, is that when we use deadly force against a violent attacker, we are not trying to kill that violent attacker. We are trying to stop his deadly actions against us. Now, typically, the violent attackers afford us the largest target that he has, which is this area here where there's his heart and lungs and bone and stuff like that. So if he ends up dying as a result of our self-defense shooting, that's on him. All we are trying to do is stop his violent actions so that we save our lives. And folks, if you're watching this video on YouTube, you should come over to Rumble to watch it because Rumble does not censor us like YouTube does. So to support the freedom of speech, go over to Rumble and search ethical preparedness in the search bar. And tip number 3, never try to guess how many shots that you fired. You see, immediately after the shooting, for public safety purposes, the police are gonna have to try to account for every round that you fired at that bad guy. The police are gonna have to try to ensure that one of your rounds didn't miss the bad guy and kill somebody a block away. So the police very well may try to ask you how many rounds that you fired so they can try to account for those rounds. So I can tell you this from personal experience. If you are forced to shoot a violent attacker in self-defense, you will almost certainly not be counting the amount of rounds that you fire. And in that state of mind that you will probably be in immediately after a self-defense shooting, with that huge surge of adrenaline going through you, you probably won't even remember how many shots that you fired, and you will probably get that answer wrong if you do try to answer that question. In fact, it is actually very common for self-defenders to honestly believe that they only shot 2 or 3 rounds at that violent attacker when in reality they emptied their whole magazine. So what I want you to remember is that if you innocently answer incorrectly how many shots that you fired, an attorney may try to use that against you in court later on. They may try to paint you as a liar to the jury by saying that, well, you said at the scene that you only fired 3 times, that you shot 10 times. Therefore, if you're lying about how many times that you shot, how should the jury believe anything that you say in court now? So my suggestion is let your attorney, your self-defense attorney, answer that question, or let the police figure that out as part of their investigation. Between seeing how many rounds that you have left in your magazine, between counting how many holes are in that dead bad guy, and seeing how many spent shell casings are around, between all of that, they can usually get a pretty good idea of how many rounds that you fired. And tip number 4 is don't verbal vomit at the scene. And let me explain what verbal vomiting is. When people are in a hyper excited state, like right after a self-defense shooting, they have a tendency to talk a lot and to talk very fast because they are trying to explain everything. Now the problem with that is that right after a self-defense shooting, you're going to have a very jumbled mind, jumbled thoughts. You're not going to be thinking clearly. So right after a self-defense shooting is not the time to try to recap step by step of what occurred, because you will probably get many things incorrect and wrong. Now what I always suggest to family and friends, if they don't belong to a legal self-defense association, I always suggest to them you give a very simple statement to the responding police at that scene, something along the lines of, that guy did X, whatever it was that put your life in danger. That guy pulled a knife on me. I was afraid I was about to die, so I defended myself. Now I don't want to answer any more questions until I speak with my attorney, and I don't feel good and I wish to be taken to the hospital. Now what that does is that gives just enough information to the police to let them know, or give a good idea that you defended yourself, but it doesn't say too much where you can get things incorrect and that can get used against you in court, civil or criminal court down the road. Now this is where I am going to shamelessly plug Firearms Legal Protection, because I use them myself and I really highly recommend them. What I like about Firearms Legal Protection is they have everything that I believe that a self-defender needs after they have been forced to shoot a violent criminal in self-defense. Right after that shooting, you are able to call that hotline where a real attorney will answer the phone, and a real attorney starts heading to your direction, where that attorney will start dealing with the cops on your behalf. And then if you still get arrested at that scene, and if bond is set, Firearms Legal Protection will bond you out of jail. And then if your self-defense shooting ends up in court, Firearms Legal Protection will provide you with an attorney that will fight on your behalf. And I will put a link to Firearms Legal Protection down below. You can check them out if you want to, and if you use that link, you will save money when you join. Now back to the video. You may believe that you won't want to verbal vomit at that scene, but I will tell you, I have seen that time and time again, where when somebody is innocent, they want to, and when they are in that excited state, they want to prove their innocence right there. And my suggestion is that the best way to protect yourself in court later down the road is to not verbal vomit at that scene and let your attorney do all the talking to the police on your behalf. Now tip number 5 is another one of those tips that you may chuckle at and say, well, I would never do that, but I'm here to tell you I have seen this happen, and that is when people are in excited states, and again, that surge of adrenaline. Tip number 5 is don't use slang to describe your actions. Don't say things like, he pulled a knife on me, so I blasted him. He pulled a gun on me, so I blew him away. Just say, he did X, whatever that crime was that put you in fear. He did X, so I defended myself. Again, when you say things like, I blasted him, I blew him away, again, you wouldn't normally say something like that, but again, when you're in a hyper excited state, your adrenaline is going through the roof. You're angry at that violent attacker because what he forced you to do, the last thing that you wanted to do was to have to shoot him. But when his actions forced you to do that, and again, you're so angry at him and your adrenaline is through the roof, again, you may use language that you would not normally use. I have seen it before. But what can happen to you when you say something like, I blasted him, I blew him away? A prosecutor, a gun-hating prosecutor, or a civil attorney may try to use that against you in court later on to paint you as a cold-blooded killer instead of somebody that was just trying to save their own life. And hey, really fast, I would absolutely love it if everybody went over to Rogue Preparedness, to her prepping channel, and subscribe to her channel. Rogue Preparedness has set a goal to hit 100,000 subs on her channel this year, and she has helped me out in the past. So let's have each other's back. Please go over to her channel and subscribe. And here is tip number 6. When the police respond to your self-defense shooting scene, do not yell at the police or call them derogatory names. Now, before you click off and say that you would never do that, I want you to think about this. In my area, if I shoot a violent criminal, I live in a conservative area. More than likely, the police are going to come out, pat me on the back, and thank me for taking a violent criminal off the street. But if you live in a liberal area where you have liberal courts and liberal police and liberal everybody, you may have liberal anti-gun police show up to your scene. And because that liberal police officer may dislike self-defenders, he may be trying to put heat on you at that scene immediately after you shot that bad guy. And again, when you are in that hyper excited state and you are already angry at that criminal for what he forced you to do, if that cop is putting heat on you or talking rudely to you at that scene, you may be tempted to yell at that police officer or call him derogatory names just again because you are so angry. So just again, folks, this video is all about protecting yourself after you protected yourself against that violent attacker. You've already saved your own life against that violent attacker, and now protect yourself for court that could possibly be happening down the road, and don't let a gun-hating prosecutor or a civil attorney try to use it against you in court that you yelled at the police at that scene. So folks, what can you add in? What are some things that I missed? What are some things that you should never say to the police after you've been forced to shoot a violent criminal in self-defense? Comment down with your tips so we all learn from each other. And if you would like to see more videos that deal with self-defense shootings, then click on the video that should be appearing on the screen just about now to learn what most other gun owners don't know. Anyways, folks, this is enough internet for me today. I do actually need to get training. But folks, if you made it this far, hey, thank you very much for watching, and I pray that you have a good night.